There is something about African hair that gives us extra power when we honor and respect our own hair. There is something about African hair that terrifies and scares all our enemies. So I wanted to explore this topic of the power that is found in African hair. In many African societies, or black societies all over the world, warriors generally had dreadlocks. They wore their hair in locks. And it would appear that they did this because it would give them extra power. And this is common throughout the African world, going all the way from Melanesia, coming all the way to Africa. There is something that all these pre-colonial societies knew that hair had, that there is a spiritual empowerment that comes with when you have locks as a man. There's a reason why when Europeans invaded Africa and other black areas of the world, they really waged war on our hair, because they too recognize that there is power in our hair, especially when it's put in braids or dreadlocks. According to the Bible, in the book of Judges, chapter 16, verse 13, there was a man called Samson. Now, this was a great warrior in those days, and he defended his entire nation from their enemies. And the one thing that gave Samson his unbelievable power was the fact that he had dreadlocks. The Bible continues to say that Samson had 7 dreadlocks on his head. Now, by this inference, we immediately understand that Samson was an African man, because it is only black people that can put their hair in locks. And we are told that his enemies got the better of him when they asked him the secret of his power. And they used a woman to do that. And when Samson revealed that his power lay in his hair, they cut off his hair and he lost his power. Now, that biblical story is going into a very ancient idea that all these pre-colonial African countries and cultures also knew, that there is power in our hair when it's put in locks, when it's in rasta form. When you look at the oldest civilization in the Americas, when you go to a place called La Venta in Central America, you'll find the oldest culture in America, the mother civilization that gave birth to the Incas, the Maya, the Aztecs, and the rest of them. These people are known as the Olmecs. They did not call themselves that, but that's what they're called today. And they left incredible evidence of their artwork. There are some giant stone statues. They left us with giant stone heads carved out of almost 50-ton rocks. And when you look at these images, these are obvious Africans or black people, if you like. But many times when they show you these pictures, they will never show you the back of the head. And when you look at the back of the head, you'll see that all these statues have dreadlocks, or they have locks, or they have braided hair, clearly identifying them, if you didn't believe the face and the phenotype, identifying them as African or as black people. The idea of locks on warriors is an extremely ancient one. That such a culture, such a civilization, they would put all their warrior kings in dreadlocks because there is power in our hair. And that seems to be the story also of Samson in the Bible, that there is power in our hair when it's put in locks. Now the Olmecs set up a massive empire in Central and South America. And after their period passed, these other cultures, the Stone Age cultures that were living there, absorbed some of their technology and their ideas and continued on as the Aztecs, as the Maya, as the Inca. If you go to ancient Cambodia, in the temple complex of Angkor Wat, which is actually a Hindu temple, you will see the four-headed Hindu god called Brahma, and you'll see how he's portrayed. And when you look carefully at the statues in Cambodia, the gods that they portray look exactly like African people or as black people. And many times they cover up those images and they show you only certain images. But when you look at these images, for example, look at this image, you can clearly see the hair. This is the hair of, this image is a Devata, a divine being. And you can see that the hair on this image is in dreadlocks form. They will never show you such images so that you can understand that most of the ancient people across the world were basically black people. But at any rate, we want to talk about the hair. You can clearly see the gods. When you go to Cambodia, when you look at the back of all these statues, when you look at their hair, their hair is in dreadlocks. There's something about the dreadlock that is associated with divinity in ancient cultures, as if their power and their strength derives from having their hair put in locks. When you look at the oldest statues of Hinduism, the statue of Shiva, the statue of Krishna, the oldest ones, again and again and again, you see that the statue or the idol is presented as a man having dreadlocks over and over again. In fact, it's very difficult to find any of these ancient gods without having dreadlocks. And today, and that also helps identify the ethnic origins of those people, those ancient peoples, because the people you see in India today calling themselves Indians are not Indians ethnically. They are Aryans who invaded from the north. And over time, they've been changing the images of the ancient gods to look like themselves, because all the original images look like black people having locks in their hair. And you'll see these modern day Aryans who live in India struggling to put their hair in locks, but they can't because the hair is not designed that way. So they try to put all sorts of chemicals, at least the quote-unquote Hindu holy men, they try to put all sorts of, sometimes even cow dung, to try and make the hair, become locked, but it doesn't work really well, because the original people were basically black people who, once they invaded and tried to replace, now they are struggling to portray themselves as the ancient gods, because clearly they are not the original source population, and so their hair doesn't really work that way. And which brings us back to the issue of the Bible. The Bible appears to present the Messiah as also having long hair, but people have shown pictures of Europeans portraying themselves as the Messiah, yet we know that ethnically the ancient Hebrews were not ethnic Europeans. They were not even what you call Arab, because Arabs, modern day Arabs, are ethnic Europeans speaking Arabic. They're the descendants of the Greeks, the Romans, and the Turks. They are not the original population. At any rate, when you look at this image is a carving that is from the Lachish relief. You may have never seen it because the church covers up such images. At any rate, from this image, this is an actual image of a Hebrew. Okay, this is about circa 500 to 600 BC. And these are Hebrews who had been captured once Israel, the northern kingdom, was attacked. The Assyrian king who captured them created a statue of that battle. And this is how he portrayed the Hebrews. And you can clearly see that these Hebrew men have dreadlocks. Their hair is in locks. These were black people. These were not European people as you have been taught. And their hair is in locks because the Bible talks about there was a sect that was called the Nazarites. And their instructions were to never shave their hair, to keep their hair long and to keep it in dreadlocks. But, the church never ever talks about that, because the whole idea is to present Europeans as God, which is not biblical. According to the Bible, the Hebrews are not ethnic Europeans. They all have dreadlocks, especially the men. The other interesting character that pops up in history was an African man who had been captured, I think, in Mozambique and sold into slavery in Japan, and he ended up being called Yasuke. And he was so strong, he was a Samson-like figure in Japan, and he became a samurai. And this is his image. This is how he was portrayed. And when you read the stories about him, as written by the Japanese, you get the impression that he was an exceedingly powerful person in his own self. And his hair caused them to be mesmerized, that anywhere he went, vast crowds of people would show up just to look at him. Again, he was a very powerful warrior, and he wore his hair in dreadlocks. So there's something about wearing our hair in locks that seems to give us additional power. Some of these images are from India, and they are from the Gupta Empire. So this is how the people of India at that time portrayed themselves. And you can clearly see a lot of these people have locks in their hair, which suggests that they're not the people that are in India right now. You can just see from the images. These are their images. If you go to India and you look at all the statuary that has been built up, a lot of the very ancient images appear to show people who have a lot of locked hair, who typically would be black people or African people. Now, when we come to the issue of ancient Kemet, which is modern day Egypt, in Kemet, the people portray themselves constantly in having locked hair or having braids. It was a very popular style to wear their hair. And it's not even an argument. If you just go there and look at all the images, and they were masters in producing images, thousands and thousands of images, you can see every single time they would portray themselves as having braids. So braids is not a modern invention. Africans have been putting their hair in braids for a long time. And a pharaoh like Joza wore his hair in very, very heavy braids. Most of them had braids, but you'll never be shown images showing them that way, because again, the Europeans try to pretend that it's them who came into Africa and built up ancient Kemet, which is very bizarre when you think about it, that Europeans are claiming that they came from Norway and came to Africa, and once they got to Africa, they went to the hottest part of Africa, and they were walking around bare-chested, building up pyramids, and then they went back to Europe and promptly forgot how to build pyramids, because you realize that there are more than 300 pyramids in Africa and not a single one in Europe. And so to resolve that problem, Europeans simply relocate themselves to Africa and pretend that they were in Africa 5,000 years ago, walking around bare-chested in the hot sun. So, but the reality is that the people of ancient Kemet made many images of themselves, and majority of the images showed them having braided hair and dreadlocks. And their most powerful kings all had dreadlocks. Why? Because there is power in putting your hair as an African in dreadlocks, especially if you're a warrior. When the Africans of Kenya decided to rebel against British imperialism and colonialism, they formed themselves into warrior groups. And the first thing they did, the number one thing they did, is that they grew out their hair into dreadlocks. And so the Mau Mau are always associated with dreadlocks. Now, why did they do that? Because there's an ancient knowledge that they have, that if you as a warrior put your hair in dreadlocks, that gives you additional power. So even without having modern day weapons, they were still able to defeat the British, who had to withdraw from Kenya in the early 1960s. Because you need to understand that Kenya was a settler colony. These people had no intention of going anywhere. They had given themselves our land in 999-year leases. They were like, this is going to be their third Reich, that they're going to be here for 1,000 years. But they were kicked out, within 70 years, much to their shock. So what knowledge did the Mau Mau have in order to grow out their hair? That's the number one thing. You have to grow out your hair. You have to put it in locks, because that will give you additional power. So there is a seed of knowledge. There is a truth, a hidden truth to Africa's or Africans' hair when it's put in dreadlocks. And we see it throughout history. Anywhere you see an African warrior who is very successful, his hair is going to be put in locks. And once the Mau Mau put their hair in locks, that simply terrified the British. They were absolutely going crazy at the image of an African man in locks, and that's why they systematically fight against African hair. If you go to any country that is dominated by non-Africans, one of the things they try to prevent Africans from doing, or black people from doing, is to put their hair in its natural form, especially to put it in a dreadlocks. They have done everything, and they have brainwashed so many Africans here to see as dreadlocks as being bad or evil. Yet it is the locks themselves that are the source of our power. Because why would God tell Samson, put your hair in locks? It will give you extra power. And don't allow a razor or a knife to touch your hair. Keep it in locks. How can it be that all these ancient cultures are portraying their gods, who were warrior kings in the distant past, all having dreadlocks? It can't be a coincidence, and it can't be a mistake. There has to be something about our hair when it's put in dreadlocks. So when you see the poor performance of African armies, it's because they don't have dreadlocks. If you were to put all these African armies in dreadlocks, let me tell you, their attitude, their spirit would change. I'm telling you, the power of the universe would simply get sucked into them, and they would become real warriors. So it cannot be that all the ancient cultures that put their warriors in dreadlocks were being foolish. There must have been something about that. And today we know that the few people in Kenya who still have locks, their warrior class has locks, is like the Maasai and the Samburu. And psychologically they remain unconquered. The rest of the African men are just slaves running around with European and Arab names. And you can see the difference in attitude, that once your hair is shaved, like me, it defeats something deep inside of you as an African man. So one of the things that I would propose is we need to have military units putting on dreadlocks, because our power lies in our hair.